woods and woodlands. Not a lot there. Well, the king of Sweden at the time, they were quite powerful. They decided that they were going to get some people to live there. And so what he did is he went to his subjects that were living in Finland. And he offered them a wonderful opportunity. That if they would move and settle this area, that they could live there 7 years without having to pay any taxes. And there were other incentives that he gave them. Because he knew that what they would need to do to farm there was something that his normal subjects in Sweden didn't have to deal with the woods. But he knew that his subjects from Finland were used to farming in the woodlands. And they actually had a special farming style made for that. And it was, as you would call now, more of a slash and burn. Where they would go out in the woods and cut the trees down and burn everything, and then farm that until the land couldn't produce as well anymore, and they would move on. So he invited my relatives to come and stay there. But we were there for a couple hundred years. Now the kings that did this, it was King Charles IX, and then it was his son, you may have heard of him, King Gustavus Adolphus. Well, they were pretty happy to have us there because we were very good at raising rye. Much better than even the others of Sweden were able to raise. And this went on, we were looked upon as being a special thing for many years, up until they discovered iron and felt that the iron refineries were more important than we were. Because of course we were out cutting the trees down and just burning them for their nutrients. Well, they wanted the charcoal for their iron. And there was too much competition for the trees. And why would you waste a good tree like that for just burning it when you could use the charcoal for iron? So they didn't really care for us. So eventually the shine wore off and they began to look down on us. In fact, they even made it so we had to supply charcoal to the refineries. And we had to sell it at a very low price. But farming was never great money to begin with. And now it was even worse. We were all very, very poor. But we were on the border there between Norway and Sweden, moving back and forth, because at the time there really wasn't a border until 1750s. That's when they finally decided that the Finns are on this side would now be Swedes, and the Finns are on this side would now be Norwegians. Well, for as bad as we had it, though, we did have it better than our Norwegian cousins. The king of Norway, he really didn't like them. In fact, he felt some of them might have even been spies. So he decided all of the Finns had to leave. They had to move to the east, get out of Norway and go to Sweden. Well, he put the order out, and the bailiff that was supposed to enforce this law, he came into the area and he looked at the living conditions of my cousins. And he decided that there was no way he could move them, because there's no way they could survive the move even 100 kilometers across the border. And so he would just ignore the king's order. And to this day, they still live there. Well, as I said, we lived there. We lived on these farms out in the woods, the forest Finns that we were. The farms we had were a little bit different maybe than the farms you're used to. The term that you may be more used to hearing is a commune. And that's how we lived. We all worked together for the farm. We all had some ownership in it. In fact, that was our term for it. That was commune. Myself, I did a little bit better than some of my others. I was actually able to move myself up a little bit. In fact, I was given a title called Torpar. And that basically just means tenant farmer, but it means that I had some land of my own to raise, and I could keep all the crops off of that land myself, as well as the work that I did for the farm. But the only way I could pay for it, since nobody had any money, was I had to put extra work in, extra labor, and I would trade labor to the farm for the ability to keep these few acres for myself. Well, about this time, I met my wife, Martia. Beautiful, beautiful woman. And we decided we were going to get married. But of course, we didn't do the official announcement right away. We waited, we did our official announcement in September with my cousins. So there were 3 of us that all announced on the same day that we were going to be married. But since we knew we were going to be married, as was tradition, Martia and I started living together. Well, before we knew it, Martia was with child. And as I said, we were very, very poor. We were a very poor parish. Our pastor did not have a lot because we didn't have a lot. In fact, we couldn't even afford to give our pastor a horse to ride to all the different areas of his parish he needed to see. Well, and that winter was a very hard winter. And so our wedding day didn't come as planned. It had to be postponed because of the hard winter. But during that time, my daughter Helena did come as planned. She was born in February, and we were married in April. Now I know many of you may consider this scandalous that a child be born out of wedlock. But back then it was quite common. In fact, there was a term for it, and it actually shows up in my daughter Helena's birth record, that she was a contrahern, which means that her parents were engaged to be married, but not yet married.
What was it?
Contrahern?
Okay.
C-O-N-T-R-A-H-E-R-N-E. So, Marty and I got married, and we continued to expand on our family. We had another daughter, Aaliyah. We had a son, Martin. And we had another son, Hendrick, named after me, of course. And it was about this time we started hearing stories of this new nation out to the west across the ocean called the United States. And we thought it might be nice for our family to go over there and start fresh and anew, where we weren't looked down upon as just these forest Finns. So in 1853, June 19th, we boarded a ship in Christiania, Norway. Many of you may know it now as Oslo. So we boarded the ship, and as we were getting on the ship, they were doing their record keeping to see who was getting on the ship and what their names were and history. So, of course, they had me down, and they had my wife, Martia. And since we were just forest Finns, they really didn't care. They just wrote down that it was the 3 daughters and the son. Now, they knew that the son was Hendrick. I'm not sure how they figured my son, Martin, was my other daughter. But we got on the boat anyways. It was a long journey, and during the journey, my 18-month-old boy, Hendrick, passed. And so he had to be buried at sea. But we did finally make it to the Americas, landing in Canada and coming down from Canada into the United States, and settled in Muskego, Wisconsin. And we stayed there for over the winter. And the following spring, we moved to Dane County, Wisconsin, by Madison. And we farmed there for a couple of years, just kind of scraped by. At that point in time, I had 2 more daughters born to me, and we had Kate and Anna. If you look behind you over there, the large Peterson stone, that is where my daughter Anna is buried, and her family. And actually the Petersons up here are also part of her family. So Kate and Anna were there. We stayed there for a couple of years, and then we decided to move to Bad Axe County, Wisconsin, to the town of Coon. Nowadays, neither one are known as that. The town is now called Coon Valley, and it's Vernon County, Wisconsin, near Tomah and Sparta. Well, we bought some land there, and actually built it up. I was able to buy more land and more land. Eventually I ended up with about 100 acres there, doing quite well. My daughter Helena married a wonderful gentleman. He was an Erickson. And so she decided to stay there. We decided to move on, as we heard of new opportunities to the west. My other daughter Aaliyah, she had gotten married, and her husband moved up to St. Paul. So I took the rest of my family, including my new son, Hendrick, and we all moved to the west, to this new area that people were just starting to settle in again, now that the Indian uprisings were done. So on July 19th of 1866, we settled on the shores of Kenzie's Lake in the county of Watonwan, in Minnesota. Now, the old-timers still called it Kenzie's Lake. All of us newcomers, of course, we called it Kansas Lake. Kenzie's Lake was one of the prior settlers in the area. Before we came, the settlers in this area were English bachelors. But during the Indian uprisings, after a couple of them were killed out by Kansas Lake, they all fled. It was too dangerous. The Army tried to help out. They actually built a fort and a stockade just to the south of our house, right on the Watonwan River there. They built a stockade to try and entice settlers to come back after the uprisings had been done. In fact, in 1866, that spring, the soldiers actually had just left, and the fort was still in fairly good shape. But the soldiers never came back. They didn't need to. The Indians had moved on to the reservation. We didn't need to worry. So we started raising our family there on the banks of Kansas Lake. In fact, if you look behind you there, that's actually a picture of my house that we built on the shores of Kansas Lake. Well, after we'd been here for a few years, there was a Norwegian church out in the area, Long Lake Church, I believe you now know it as. But that was a Norwegian church, and we felt it would be good to have a good Swedish church. And so the